Hello everyone, this is Allen Soares. I'm a filmmaker and an Emmy-nominated motion picture editor, but I've also spent the last 25 years studying the Catholic Church and its history and its teachings. And I've spent at least half that time as a catechist and an apologist. And I often have people come to me with pieces of media and pop culture asking me what the Catholic response to this is. So I decided to start doing this series where I just basically do commentaries on movies and other pieces of media and just current events. So I don't watch the Joe Rogan experience. I don't like Joe Rogan. He's entertained a lot of crazy lies about Catholics on his show. Many of them he espouses as his own beliefs, and they're provably false. A friend of mine recently sent me this episode of the Joe Rogan Experience in which Joe is interviewing Mel Gibson. I've done a previous video about Mel Gibson. The gist of that video is that a lot of people think that Mel Gibson is a Catholic, and he has presented himself that way in the past, especially when he was promoting Passion of the Christ. He was very cagey about talking about exactly what the nature of his religion was. But it's totally public knowledge now that Mel Gibson is not a Catholic. He's a sedevacantist. It's not the same thing. They're not in communion with the Catholic Church. But he still sort of obfuscates this all the time. He does it in this interview. But anyway, if you'd like to know more about that, you can go watch the video that I did about Mel Gibson recently, and you can learn more about that. Anyway, let's get started.
And you can score big by betting on them at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your bet? Try betting on something simple like a player to score 6. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick.
Promoting gambling addictions.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369.
That was a crazy movie because it was a great movie, but it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
Oh yeah, no, there was.
Which I thought was very strange. There was like Hollywood resistance to that movie. Like people didn't like that you were making it. It seemed like.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
Well, I think this is kind of silly because this has been a Mel Gibson narrative for a long time that there's Hollywood resistance to him making a movie about Christ. They're talking about Passion of the Christ. When in reality he was completely able to make the movie, which is for most filmmakers like myself, getting a movie made is like next to impossible. Like you have to basically fund it yourself, and you're never going to reach the amount of money that he spent on making that movie, doing it the way that people like me are forced to do it. You want to talk about resistance? I can barely get anything off the ground. Okay. Like I'm about to shoot 1/3 of my next feature on a budget of $50,000, and I raised it through crowdfunding. No studio would ever let me make my film. In fact, it's been, I've pitched my film all over. I pitched it at Warner Brothers. I pitched it overseas to smaller financiers. I pitched it at Angel Studios, all over the place. And you know what they tell you most often is can we get rid of the Catholic elements? Hollywood has a history of not liking that stuff. But for Mel Gibson to talk about, they were resistant to it. Oh, come on. It's an internationally distributed movie that was made for millions and millions of dollars. So you didn't like that somebody panned it in the reviews because they don't like Christians? Get used to it, man. That's the history of America. But to say he encountered resistance, give me a break.
Because.
By the way, he also made false claims about resistance from within the Catholic Church. Like he claimed once that he went to the offices of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and tried to get a bishop to talk to him about this movie for some reason. And there were no bishops there because the bishops of the United States don't all stay at the office of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. They have their own diocese that they run, and they have to live there, right? So they're not there all the time. He went there and claimed that the bishops refused to speak to him. In reality, there were none there. He just lied about it. to make it seem like the Catholic Church was conspiring to sabotage his movie, which is complete nonsense. The Catholic Church has no obligation to promote your movie. But yeah, let's talk about the resistance to your movie, Mel, that made $612 million globally. Is one of the most successful religious films ever made in history. Second highest grossing rated R movie ever at the time of its release. A lot of resistance there.
You know, I was born into a Catholic family. I'm very Christian.
That's a lie. Mel Gibson was born into a sedevacantist family. Sedevacantists hate Catholicism. They claim to be Catholic, which is common of many hate groups. They'll take on the appearance and claim to be the group that they hate. They are openly in schism with the church. They deny that there's been a pope on the seat of Peter since the 60s, that's a schismatic belief. You can't just decide that there's no pope all of a sudden. He finances a private sedevacantist church in Agora Hills that is not in communion with the Catholic Church. He was not born into a Catholic family. He was born into a sedevacantist family. I'm not saying he's not a Christian. I'm not saying he doesn't have Christian beliefs, but this particular statement is a lie.
So depicting that was an honor, but it was also, you got the daylights beat out of you for it.
Yeah, because there's resistance, first of all.
Got the daylights beat out of him. His movie made $612 million. He owns a house in Costa Rica. Like, I get it. People criticize your movie. That's going to happen. Especially if you make something about Christ. I mean, yeah, people are going to say things about it. But it seems to have gone really well for you, Mel.
From secular Hollywood, where, for whatever reason, Christianity is the one religion that you're allowed to disparage.
Yeah.
Christianity...
It's true, but it's primarily Catholics. And Joe Rogan is part of this. Joe Rogan often tells lies about Catholics and tells lies about things that are happening in the hierarchy of the church. Often. So don't tell me that it's secular Hollywood. It's everybody. It's Protestant Christians. It's Joe Rogan. It's Mel Gibson. They all level terrible, untrue criticisms of Catholics. Hollywood does it, but I mean, so do these guys.
All these progressive, open-minded, leftist people, they'll embrace all these different religions until it comes to Christianity. And for whatever...
Now, this is true, but particularly when it comes to Catholicism. I can tell you from personal experience, like working in animation for major studios, that it's extremely common to hear your peers at work regurgitate literal KKK propaganda, like from propaganda pamphlets distributed by the KKK about Catholics, especially around Columbus Day and things like that. They'll literally quote KKK propaganda. I guess they don't know they're doing it, but it's very prevalent. These are all people that claim to be, sort of politically and morally progressive people who hate the KKK, but they sure do like to quote the Klan when it comes to the Catholic Church. The Klan is an exclusively Protestant Christian organization. Most Protestants agree with this stuff too. Like a lot of the things you hear Protestants say about Catholics, it comes from this aggressive, 100-year propaganda campaign where they tried to smear us in every aspect of our lives. And that stuff has been sort of held on to by modern American Protestants. And then you have like the progressive people who are either atheistic or pagan or whatever, but they really are just kind of politically Protestant. They have all the same anti-Catholic prejudices as like a 16th century Puritan. And a lot of it comes from the Klan.
People do feel free to beat up on it.
Mm-hmm.
Even I do.
Yeah, even you do, Mel. You constantly lie about Catholics. Constantly. You're just like the rest of them.
When they appoint some cardinal in some diocese and he's been covering up for like people who are child molesters.
Yes.
Like Theodore McCarrick or Cardinal Wuerl or those.
Theodore McCarrick. Okay, so Theodore McCarrick, they appoint cardinals You're saying they appoint some cardinal who's been covering up abuse. And then you name Cardinal McCarrick, who was accused of sexual abuse, never put on trial. So there is never a decision about whether or not he was guilty. But then the Catholic Church immediately laicized him, and he's essentially lived in like a friary ever since, basically imprisoned there. What did the church do wrong? I mean, you named McCarrick, Mel. What did the church do wrong in responding to that?
It's kind of, guys, I mean...
Or the Pope.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm
Benedict.
Oh, not Benny. Well, he was covering up, but like,
Yeah.
so is the guy now.
Is he really?
Okay, so Mel, let's see some proof. Like, this is a very common thing for the popes, Benedict and Francis and John Paul II. They were all covering up. It's a conspiracy to cover up child abuse. I want to see the evidence. This is a serious allegation that the popes conspired to cover up child abuse. I've never seen any evidence that backs this up. I mean, this has been, people have been talking about this stuff for 30 years and just badgering me to accept it. Popes and the bishops are all conspiring to cover this up. And then when you look into the actual evidence, it doesn't exist. I'm not saying that there was no abuse. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that this conspiracy that was cooked up mostly by the Boston Globe, it's not true. The most you could say is that there was some abuse, but in reality, it's actually far less common among Catholic priests than it is most other walks of life. But they pushed it all the way up to, it's a conspiracy among the bishops and the popes to cover these things up. You need to provide evidence for that if you're going to keep saying that.
It's not great.
I thought he was like the more progressive Pope.
Oh, he's very progressive, yes.
But he's...
Yeah, he's so progressive. Pope Francis is so progressive. He responded to the scandal by appointing an abuse survivor to a Vatican panel about child sexual abuse. And then it turned out that that abuse survivor was a fraud, which often happens, by the way. Many of these cases end up to be fraudulent. People hate hearing that. They'll accuse you of you're covering for abusers and stuff. It's like, no, I'm saying these people were frauds, and it's proven. These particular people. You can't say that Pope Francis didn't respond to this in some way. He acted in good faith, and he was duped for his trouble.
Covering up for stuff as well. Well, they all are. I mean, it's a dark institution.
They all are, Joe says. It's a massive allegation, Joe. You got evidence to back that up, or is this just the acceptable thing to say? I mean, the guy just a few minutes ago said, for some reason, Christianity is the one thing you're allowed to make fun of and blast and tell lies about. And then here he is, a couple of minutes later, doing the exact same thing. It's just socially acceptable to say these things.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
well, the institution, it was instituted by Christ, but that doesn't mean that it can't be flawed. And there's...
Well, of course the people can be flawed. I mean, Christ ordained Judas. Well, it doesn't mean it can't be flawed. To the degree that you abandon it, Mel, and then start telling lies about it, because that's what you're doing. Are you saying that because Judas, because he betrayed the church after being ordained by Christ, that we should abandon the church? That we should start our own church that's not in communion with that church?
A school of thought that says it isn't what it purports to be anymore.
What he's talking about is the Sedivacantists, which is what he is. That's the school of thought, okay? They're schismatics. They're not part of the church. They've abandoned the church, and they attack it from the outside with lies.
It's moved away from what it was intended to be and what it is.
Which is a contradiction of the words of Christ, who promised that the gates of hell would not prevail. If you're trying to say that some perceived slight by a bishop or a pope is grounds to say that the church no longer exists and that it's not what it was meant to be, you're denying the promise of Christ. I mean, Christ ordained Judas, who betrayed him. Christ ordained Peter, the first of the popes, who committed apostasy 3 times within earshot. Why couldn't you say then, well, the church is not what it's intended to be. It's time to abandon it and go start a church in Agora Hills that's not in communion with that church anymore. From the perspective of a Catholic, this is nonsense. And for him to claim to be one.
Almost, there's a guy called Bishop Vigano who says it's a counterfeit.
Bishop Vigano is insane. Bishop Vigano is a conspiracy theorist, a liar. He's crazy.
I don't adhere to a post-conciliar church. I adhere.
Can you define what that means?
Okay.
He's talking about the Second Vatican Council, which is what Sedivacantists claim is the point at which the Catholic Church stopped being the Catholic Church. The evidence for this is nothing. There's nothing to be found in the Articles of Vatican II that suggest this. There's nothing that can be found in current Catholic teaching that can suggest this. The teaching hasn't changed. The liturgy hasn't changed, except that now we do it in different languages, which has been the case before. So yeah, that's what he's talking about. Vatican II, a valid council that he denies is valid, and thus denies the validity of the Catholic Church, which he also claims was founded by Christ, who promised that nothing could prevail against it. But yeah, go ahead and tell me Mel Gibson's a Catholic.
There was an event that happened in the 60s. First, there was an event in the Vatican where they elected John the 23rd Pope, right, in 1958. I was 2 years old, right? He was elected, and it was a very funny thing that happened in the conclave. You know, usually there's white and black smoke that goes out of the chimneys to tell you, we have a pope, you know, habemus papam, you know. And the white smoke came out. And everybody cheered, and they went crazy. And then about a half an hour later, black smoke came out. That never in history has that happened, that the white smoke came out, and then the black smoke came
So
out.
white smoke means we found a new pope. Black smoke means no pope.
That's right. They'd have votes, or there'd be one reason or another they'd have a round.
So what he's talking about is called the Siri thesis. It's a conspiracy theory that Mel's father believed that when John the 23rd was elected, that there was an incident where white smoke came out, but then was replaced by black smoke. And that this meant a pope had been elected, but there was a conspiracy that the conclave was pressured to say, oh, no, we didn't vote for that guy. And it was Cardinal Siri. That's why it's called the Siri thesis. Would you like to know what group Mel Gibson's father believed was responsible for pressuring the conclave from the outside? I'm sure you can guess, but I won't leave you hanging. It's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Mel's father believed that the conclave was pressured from the outside by Jews to overturn the election and elect a different pope. But if I remember right, and you could correct me on this, I think Mel's father, I think even he eventually denounced this whole conspiracy theory because there's no evidence that any of this ever happened. Like the white smoke, black smoke thing, like that, there's no evidence that that is a real story. Like, it didn't happen. So, but Mel Gibson's take on this is that this is the point at which the church divided, and the pope that was announced as the winner of the election after this was not the real pope. And it's all hinged on this concept of white smoke coming out, as if white smoke has magical powers. Like these Sedivacantists do this a lot. They'll claim that the Latin language has more power than other languages, which is like, it's like an occult conspiracy theory. Like, that's not true. The Tridentine Mass, which the Sedivacantists claim is the only true Mass, is younger than the Protestant schism. It's like a fairly recent liturgical setting. So I don't know why they advocate for specifically that liturgy. But yeah, the liturgy had been in Latin before that, but it was just because in the Roman Empire, Latin was a common language. That's why they called the first Latin translation of the Bible, which started in 382, the Vulgate or Vulgata. It means vulgar. It means translation to the vulgar language. It means the common tongue, right? It wasn't because Latin had special powers. It was because it was commonly spoken, okay? So for Vatican II to say, like, well, the Mass should be in the common tongue, that's just a common thing in the Catholic Church. It takes a long time for these changes to happen. It was never in Latin in the first place because Latin had magic powers, and we didn't use white smoke to signal that a pope had been elected, because white smoke has magic powers and has, like, if you accidentally say the wrong thing, like if I accidentally say, like, oh, Biden won the presidency, that doesn't mean he won. Like, that, if he didn't win, he didn't win, right? But even so, none of this happened. The white smoke, black smoke thing, that was never happened. It's a conspiracy theory, okay? Just like most of the stuff that Mel Gibson says in this interview. Like, I skipped a lot of stuff at the beginning because he talks about all of these crazy conspiracy theories on top of the sedevacantist conspiracy theory. It's tiring. Like, the guy is a nut.
So what was the scenario?
That somebody was elected, and that maybe something else happened, and he was pushed aside and someone else was put in.
Do you want to know what he believes? He's not saying it. What he believes is, because this is the Siri thesis, what he's saying is the Jews pressured the conclave from the outside to push that guy aside and elect a different person. That's the Siri thesis. But he's not going to say that, right? And we all remember the anti-Semitic drunken tirade, which for some reason we've all forgotten. But I'm going to tell you, like, everything he said in that rant is stuff that sedevacantists commonly believe. And now he's talking about the Siri thesis, which is a known anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. So, I don't know. Tell me again, like, he's just a Catholic. He's a regular Catholic.
So it was
Power struggle.
some kind of power struggle. And, of course, the man who came out was a man called Angelo Roncalli, and he was John the 23rd. Now, it's interesting to note that never had a pope taken the name of another pope ever before in history. But this man took the name of a known anti-pope from the 15th century that Cosimo de' Medici put in there as his own.
Okay, so he's trying to say that Pope John the 23rd named himself after an anti-pope called John the 23rd. That's not what happened, okay? The name John is the name of John the Apostle and the evangelizer. The real Pope John the 23rd was the 23rd Pope to take this name. The anti-pope that took the name John the 23rd is not counted as the 23rd Pope to take that name because he is an anti-pope. So that makes John the 23rd, the actual Pope, the 23rd Pope to take that name. He wasn't naming himself after an anti-pope. It's not difficult to understand. If the anti-pope had been an actual pope, then he would have been the legitimate John the 23rd. But he wasn't. He was an anti-pope. Therefore, there was no Pope John the 23rd. And the actual Pope John the 23rd, that eventually came to be, was actually the 23rd Pope to take that name. Get it? It's not a reference to the anti-pope. Like, it's a denial that that man was actually a pope.
Man, I'll get you in the chair and then everything will be rosy. Everything will go good for business, whatever he was putting him in there for, some corrupt reason. But, and there have been corrupt men in that place before. I mean, there's Allen.
This is true. Popes can be corrupt. Peter himself, the first of the popes, denied Christ 3 times. And Christ still made him the head of the apostles. The resilience of the dogmas of the church in spite of the corruption of popes, is a sign of the legitimacy of the church. That's just a basic idea in Catholicism. So yes, he's right. There have been corrupt popes. But the dogmas have never changed because they're protected by the Holy Spirit. There's never been another institution on earth that's had its ideas protected in such a way. They always fall apart because of the corruption of their leaders, but this one doesn't. That's the point. So I'll give him that statement. But for some reason, he seems to have forgotten this and abandoned the church because of what he perceives as corruption in the church. Namely from, citing this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that never happened.
Alexander VI and Julius II and Sixtus IV. I mean, some of these guys are, they're not saints. So he took the name of a known anti-pope from the 5th century who actually said, yes, I'm an anti-pope. Sorry, I'm not the right guy.
He didn't take that guy's name. The idea is he wasn't really a pope. The name John the 23rd was not really the name of a pope. Get it? So the guy after him that decided to name himself John would be the 23rd pope to name himself John. Get it?
So he took the same name as that guy, John the 23rd. So it's interesting, don't you think? I mean, why would he do that?
Well, whenever you have...
You're not allowed to take the name John anymore because an anti-pope called himself John?
that kind of power. Like, I'm sure you've been to the Vatican, right?
Yeah.
It's stunning.
Yes, it's huge.
It's so crazy. When you're walking around, you see just the massive amount, just the dollar value in the art that they possess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Vatican City preserves a lot of treasures of humanity because it's been around for the church has been around for 2,000 years. So yeah, there's a lot of treasures of humanity that are preserved there. You can't sell you can't, we're not going to sell our culture, so it's not like there's like the dollar value. They don't have that money. It's stored there in this collection of heritage, right? So it's not like they're making. I don't understand. This is like a thing that people criticize about the church. They have all of this art that's worth billions. They can't sell it. Like the Vatican City runs on a deficit just so that it can preserve these treasures of humanity so that people can see them. The present version of St. Peter's Basilica is already 500 years old. You think that that's just oozing money out? Like, it costs money to preserve it. Just because it's possibly, if you sold it, it would be worth money. That doesn't mean they have that money. You're suggesting we should sell off our culture for all this money and give it to the poor and just sell it into obscurity so that nobody will ever see it again.
And, it's a very small country. It's a country.
Yeah, it's a country inside of a small city.
Yeah.
Because Rome's not the biggest city.
What's so weird about that? That Catholics would have one tiny territory, a tiny city, to call theirs. We can't have a couple of acres in which we're not, like, our leadership is not influenced by the leaders of other nations. That's weird to you? What's so weird about that?
No.
And then it's got a country inside the city
Yeah.
with walls around it.
Sure.
And you can't extradite people.
Yeah. Pretty.
With walls around, I mean, you can walk in. You can walk, the gates are open, you can walk into it. Walls, it's got walls around it. Yeah, because it's been attacked. But the gates are open. Like, you walk in, you can walk in. Like, why do they feel like they have to lie about these kinds of things? It's disgusting to me.
Weird.
How convenient.
Yeah. Even Ratzinger, he didn't drive from the Vatican to the other place. He flew.
Ooh.
What other place? From the Vatican to the other place? What other place?
It was only a little while, because who knows why? I don't know.
Well, he was wanted.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he had done...
Ratzinger was wanted? But by the way, he's talking about Benedict XVI. This is a sedevacantist, anti-Catholic thing that they do. They won't call the popes by their papal name, right? So he calls him Ratzinger because he won't call him Benedict XVI. It's just an anti-Catholic slight.
One of the things that he had done was he had moved a priest that had molested 100 kids, and he moved him to some new place where he molested deaf kids.
Yeah.
Didn't happen. Joe Rogan is he's just lying. He's just lying. I think what is being discussed here is that there was a priest who, I don't know, was accused of abuse, and he was moved to a certain diocese to undergo therapy, like rehabilitation, which at the time was what the judges would sentence these guys to. Like, a lot of times the police wouldn't even arrest these people. They would, because the judges would just sentence them to rehabilitation. So whether you went to the police or the judges, you were advised to send these people into rehabilitation, psychological rehabilitation programs. This the kind of stuff was promoted by the Boston Globe, which they went after the Catholic Church for doing this, when the Boston Globe itself actually was promoting it and saying this was the right thing to do. So you'd call the police on one of these people. The police would either say, we're not going to arrest him because the judge is just going to sentence him to rehabilitation, or they would arrest him and then the judge would sentence him to rehabilitation. And then the church would try to comply with that and was often screwed over because, like, they'll try to say that the bishops were covering things up, but in reality what was happening was the state and the media were saying this is how you handle this. And it was often the bishops that would end up calling it out because the person would reoffend. And then so they'd go back to the police and the judges would say, send them to psychological rehabilitation. So this would happen twice. And then the bishops would say, this doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this? But the media would report it as if the bishops were trying to cover it up, when it was actually the state and the media that were saying this is how it's supposed to be done. And the bishops were often calling it out. Long story short, I think what they're talking about is a bishop was moved into a diocese for rehabilitation, like psychological rehabilitation. Cardinal Ratzinger at the time, he wasn't the Pope yet, approved the move so that he could go to psychological rehabilitation, recommended by the state, and then later was reassigned because he was rehabilitated. But Cardinal Ratzinger didn't have anything to do with that reassignment. He had no idea that it happened. And then the guy reoffended because the state and the media were wrong about this, and they try to blame the church for it. I want to recommend a couple of books. Okay, like I got one right here. It's called Sins of the Press, and it's by David F. Pierre Jr. And this is largely just a critique of the Boston Globe, how terrible their reporting on anything is. But in the last third of it, I would say, it gets into like the Spotlight case that everybody references, and it gets into how much the Boston Globe actually lied about this. The other book is by the same guy, David F. Pierre Jr., and it's called The Greatest Fraud Never Told. And that book is entirely about the Pennsylvania grand jury report, which is more recent. And it goes over what a terribly inaccurate document that the Pennsylvania grand jury report was. I've actually read the Pennsylvania grand jury report. It's almost 1,000 pages long, so I don't know very many people that actually have tried to read it. But the contents of the report contradict the introduction page of the report. Like the thing that all the headlines said is from the introduction page of that report. It turns out it's all lies. If you read the report, there's a ton of stuff in it. There's cases that were known to be fraudulent. There was one priest implicated that was born before the invention of the light bulb, and they tried to pass it off as if this guy was alive today in Pennsylvania and committing these crimes, and it was being covered up. It's lunacy. But I highly recommend that you read those two books if you're interested in this subject, because I don't want to talk about it ad nauseum, because it makes me angry.
That's the dirtiest, most evil practice that the Catholic Church has been accused of.
I think so. And
That it's been accused of. I mean, anybody can accuse anybody of anything, and that's what these people do. There are thousands of law firms in Los Angeles alone that do nothing but file lawsuits against the Catholic Church. It's so many lawsuits. To litigate them and to try to fight these lawsuits would cost trillions. It'd be enough money to put men on the moon 3 times. Right? So they pay out settlements so that they don't have to go to court, because it would destroy the entire Catholic population of Los Angeles to try to fight these cases. And then they'll say, look, they paid this settlement. That means they're guilty. No, that's not what it means. Right? So accusing somebody of something is not proof of guilt. Most of the time, these allegations are never even investigated. The Nazis used to engage in the same thing. They would accuse an entire Catholic population of a town of doing heinous sexual crimes, right? The kind of things that make a whole population instantly hate a group of people. It's the same exact tactic, and you can prove it. You can download the Pennsylvania grand jury report for yourself, and you can read it. I'm not just saying this, like, you can read it yourself. And a lot of you probably won't. You'll just listen to the headlines and listen to people like this. But I challenge you not to do that.
many institutions as well, but that is a very bad one. And I think it's all part and parcel of the same corruption that crept in. And when you asked what's the difference between pre-Vatican II, so Vatican II happened, and of course...
Mel Gibson's going to go into, it's all because of Vatican II and blah, blah, blah. Mel Gibson's the kind of person that will tell you that the media lies about everything, unless the media is telling you something bad about the Catholic Church. Then all of a sudden, it's true. Is this the kind of, he's going to tell you in every other instance that the media is lying. But not this time? It's duplicitous.
They took the church and they reformed it, and they changed things in it. And
what did they change? Precisely what did they change? He'll never tell you. He'll tell you lies, but never anything real that actually changed.
We got a pope that brought a South American idol into the church to worship.
Really?
He did. The Pachamama. He brought the South American, and he got...
I don't know what...
Yeah, so another sedevacantist conspiracy theory, that this South American idol he's talking about represented, before Catholicism, it represented Mother Earth. And then after Catholicism, it represents the Virgin Mary. This is well known, and it's common throughout the world for things like this to happen. For instance, the Virgin Mary is represented in a very Roman way. If you go into European places, she's represented as a Japanese woman. If you go to Japan, she's represented as a Native American woman. If you go to America, the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe represents herself as a mestizo woman, complete with symbols of the culture all over her. That's a pre-Vatican II apparition, by the way. So for these people to suggest that this is somehow different, when this is commonly practiced throughout the Catholic world, it's just dishonest. It's xeno-nationalistic. It's disgusting. Okay? So that's, if anybody tries to bring up the Pachamama thing to you again, that's the reality of it. And this guy is just a liar. Okay? And so are pretty much all sedevacantists.
Why would he do that?
Good question.
Yeah, why would he invite some indigenous Catholics from South America to present their expression of the Virgin Mary. Why would a pope ever do that? That's crazy. I mean, what are you talking about, dude?
But he did.
Did he have an explanation for why he did it?
Yeah, it's kind of a weasel-worded thing of like, oh, all religions are just as good as one another. But,
Oh, is that what he said? Where did he say that? I realize there's a recent article that came out that said that the Pope said that. All religions are roads, to the same place or something like that. He never said that. You realize the Pope doesn't really speak English, right? Like, they have to translate what he says. And often the media will mistranslate it on purpose. If you read the actual statement, if you go to the Vatican website and read that address, he never said that. If that's what you're talking about. I don't know why are you connecting that statement to the Pachamama thing? They happen years and years apart, but it seems like you're trying to make it seem like they're connected.
No, if that's his contention.
He shouldn't be the Pope.
No. I mean,
How can you be the Pope if you say all religions are just as good?
Yeah, we all worship.
I'll tell you how. He didn't say that, Joe. Like, how can you be a media personality who just says these things as if they really happened? By the way, he does this all the time. Well, if this thing that never happened, then how could this be the truth? Well, it didn't happen.
The hierarchy even worshipped it. They had a ceremony around it outside.
What?
Well, that constitutes apostasy.
Yeah.
That's an.
Worshiping the Virgin Mary as a Catholic constitutes apostasy now.
That's called apostasy.
Right.
That's a falling away from it. And
No, Mel, you're just a xeno-nationalist, anti-Semite, racist. That's all. You can't stand the idea of Catholics having their own cultural expressions outside of whatever specific European custom was being practiced in the 1500s in the Catholic Church.
the very nature of apostasy means that you have to be part of it to fall away from it.
So he's saying this as a guy who is openly in schism with the Catholic Church. This is a lunatic.
That there are big realms, spiritual realms. There's good, there's evil, and they are slugging it out for the souls of mankind.
It's true, Mel, and you're on the wrong side. So there's another hour and a half of this to go, and I'm tired of listening to it. I think I've said enough about it. Like Mel Gibson, I get that people like him. He's sort of likable when he's not being a complete lunatic. You got to realize, he's not who he claims to be. Most of the stuff he says is just straight up anti-Semitic conspiracy theory nonsense. That's just common sedevacantist beliefs. So don't get caught up in this nonsense that this guy's like the savior of Hollywood or something, or that he's a Catholic and we should identify with him. He's not. Sure, I liked movies that Mel Gibson has done. The Mad Max films are my favorite films of all time. Passion of the Christ is fine, I guess. But there's plenty of people that work on movies that are lunatics. I don't know why, because you like his movies or you like his acting, that means I got to accept the rest of it. I don't. In fact, I can barely stand to look at the guy anymore. As with anybody, of course, I believe that the lawmaker is above the law, and that Mel Gibson can be, I'll go to heaven and I'll run into Mel Gibson, and I hope so. But I hope and pray even more that he stops this stuff and changes before that time, because it's damaging. It's extremely damaging, and it's divisive, and it's evil. Anyway, on that dark note, I hope you all enjoyed this or learned something from this. If you'd like to see these videos before anybody else does, you can join my Patreon, which is linked down below. If there's a specific topic or a movie or video or a piece of media or pop culture or just current events that you'd like me to comment on, please feel free to let me know in the comments. And I guess I'll see you next time.